welcome to this webinar about bringing your brand into focus. It's a beautiful day here in Chaos Cottage, and I'm really looking forward to this webinar. If you were trying to join last week's webinar in the morning, apologies for the outage. There was a power cut and some of my backup systems didn't work quite as advertised and I couldn't do it. But I'm here now. So today I'm going to be talking about brand focus, and the difference between what we call a cloudy brand and a really sharply focused one, and why that's important for business. So let's get right to that. I'm just going to start with some context about why we feel empowered to talk about this. Over the years, we've worked on more than 130 branding projects, including, for example, messaging and positioning for Hewlett-Packard Enterprise SimpliVity for their green circular economy messaging for Microsoft Project. So we've done quite big, complex branding projects for big, well-known products. And more recently, we've done projects where we've worked on the visual identity, verbal identity, website, and content for a client, and there's some interesting case studies on our website. So this is coming from more than 25 years experience of doing this for big and small companies in the tech sector. If you'd like me to have a look at your brand, your marketing, your messaging, I'd be delighted. Just book a call with me, articulatemarketing.com/meet. That's my calendar there. You book it with me, I will turn up and do it. If you have any questions, you'd like to talk to me, Matthew@articulatemarketing.com. Love to hear from you. And final parish notice, Loki arrived here on Saturday. So today's Thursday, and already he's making his presence felt with midnight Zoomies and things. So welcome to our new Chief Feline Officer. And I just wanted to share that with you because I'm slightly, in love with him. I think he's fabulous. Okay, there are some webinars going back 3-4 years on our I think this is webinar 98 or 97. Lots of pre-recorded webinars, lots of webinars coming up. Go have a look at articulatemarketing.com/webinars if you want to explore what we have to say more. Right, in this webinar, we're going to be talking about brand clarity. So how you get a brand sharp and focused so that you can direct and support your marketing efforts. We're going to look at what a brand really is, why people maybe are not getting and understanding your current brand, and the hidden costs of an unclear, cloudy brand. So let's start with what we think a brand really is. And I'll tell you a little story. I think 9 times out of 10 when we're talking to a prospect or a new client and we say, so have you got brand, your brand sorted out? Can we help with that? Maybe if we're doing a website project or something. They go, oh yeah, we've got that. And they send us a brand Bible that's basically how to use the logo. So it's a logo, and sometimes there's some color palette, sometimes there's some font information. Occasionally at the back of the brand Bible, there's a page that says our core values are this. This is not always the case. I mean, maybe 1 in 10 we actually get what we would call a brand, which is more than that. So let's talk about what more than that actually looks like. Fundamentally, it's the story that you tell consistently across every touch point that your business has. So yes, it includes visual identity and logo, of course, but your brand also manifests in the way that your website is designed and built. It manifests itself in your sales assets. It arises in your offline presence, so events and physical locations. And do people even have business cards anymore? It manifests itself in your content and social media, in your tone of voice. And if you think about brands that are well known and clear, they actually have a really strong why. They tell you what they're going to do for you, what their positioning is, how they're going to make a difference. And actually that is the heart of a really strong, clear brand. It's supported by verbal branding, right? Verbal branding, tone of voice that's applied consistently from everything from invoices to thought leadership content, from podcasts through to blog posts and web copy. If it's consistent and distinctive, that's part of your brand. If it isn't, it's a cloudy brand, or it's unplanned and unmanaged. It manifests itself in your messaging and the values and promises that you give, and the experience that customers have when they work with your prospects have during the sales process. So there's a lot to it, and it needs to be designed, planned, and managed and operated effectively. So we like it if a client comes to us and says, we've done all that, and they give us a really clear positioning of, this is what we do, who we do it for, this is why we're best, this is where we're positioned against our competitors, these are the sorts of problems that we solve. This is, if you look at the EOS framework, which we use, it asks you to be really clear about your 3 uniques, the things that make you different, and your promise, your guarantee. So these are elements that you might also include in this, but they're all getting to kind of what's distinctive and different. When it's all working and consistent and clear, people can quickly grasp who you are, what you do, and why it matters. And I would say also why you are different from the other choices that they have. Where it isn't clear, consistent, cohesive, and properly aligned, you become forgettable, or I think actually worse, interchangeable, right? So in a competitive market, being very commoditized is the most dangerous thing, because then it starts being about price. What you want is something uniquely defensible and differentiating. That is going to help you stand out in a crowded market, that is going to help you build trust, and this is really, really increasingly important in this sort of AI-driven deluge of nonsense. It's going to help you improve your marketing performance, and that's not just about making your marketing work better, but I think this is critical, helping you focus on the kind of marketing activities that are going to work and not waste time, money, and effort on things that are less likely to be effective. So if you're very clear about your brand in its totality, it's also a very effective filter for marketing plans and marketing activities, and could be a very powerful focusing thing, rather than chasing every new idea that comes up, or every sort of idea that the boss has, or random acts of marketing. It can also help you in the sales process to defend margins and shorten sales cycles, because it gives potential buyers clear signals, clear messages about why they should pick you. And that stuff is psychologically very important during the sales process. You can give people heuristics to make the choice of your service or product more defensible, and sort of reassure the sort of various psychoses that people go through when they're buying, about risk management and competition and choice and so on. And in fact, I would argue that as we move towards a more middle and bottom of funnel engagement with people because of AI search and zero-click search and so on, getting it right is increasingly, branding is increasingly about that early stage of sales and that sales engagement. Okay, so let's explore the kinds of pitfalls and traps that people fall into that explains why perhaps you've got an unclear or cloudy brand. Okay, so first of all, so I'm just a tiny bit of technical adjustment here. First of all, there is this sort of tendency to want to appeal to everybody, right? And this is, we hear this very often when we're going through a branding exercise, branding workshops. Oh, but if we say that, we're going to alienate these people, or we might want business from this target sector, or this kind of business, or some element of what you do. The danger is, if you try to address every buying persona in every possible market, the thing gets stretched very thin and becomes very generic. I went back when I was a freelance journalist, and a wise editor said to me, Matthew, if you try and write about everything for everybody, you'll fail. Be the best writer about something that you can be really well known for. I ended up writing quite a lot about technology and aviation. So Blair Enns talks about the benefit of being very specific in who you're targeting. He talks about, and it's a golfing metaphor, which I don't understand because I don't play golf, the difference between the hole, the green, and the sand traps, right? You want to aim for and target the bullseye, the hole. You're happy if you land on the green, a company that maybe is not your target ICP, target persona, or the exact thing. But they'll come anyway. If you're very clear and distinctive about what you do and who you do it for, you'll actually end up attracting those other opportunities. You don't alienate them. And then you kind of want to make sure you rule out the people who aren't going to buy from you because they can't afford what you sell, or they can't integrate it in what in their business practices or something. For example, it's quite important for us at Articulate to say we use HubSpot to build websites, because if you really need a Webflow website, we're not going to be able to do that for you. Now, we can persuade you why HubSpot would be better for your website than Webflow, and we've got good arguments about that, or WordPress or whatever. But there's a little bit about saying that if you are, and similarly with the B Corp thing that we have, if you're a company that is going to be unprogressive, you probably aren't going to enjoy working with us, because we care quite a lot about things like the environment. Okay, so to be clear, have a clear brand, you need a laser sharp focus and research and consideration about your ideal client profiles, the ideal companies you want to sell to in B2B, and the buyer personas, the people who actually influence those purchases, and who isn't going to be a good fit. And if you haven't started with that clarity, you will not have a clear brand. The next pitfall is inconsistency. So websites that use different messaging on different pages, or that are out of date, sales decks that don't match the website, brochures that are out of date, templates. And it's very easy to do this. At Articulate, we have a website that's been on HubSpot for 8 years, and it was imported from WordPress. It'd been on WordPress for 10 years before that, and there's quite a lot of content. We spend a lot of time at the moment just cleaning the old stuff up and removing things that, we've got a lot of content, for example, about advertising, which we used to do and don't do now. So keeping that consistency takes work, but it is really, really important, because it can be very jarring for the brand experience if somebody comes along and sees something that doesn't connect with what you're saying on, say something on the homepage, and then inside you say something else. The hidden danger also is internal misalignment. So people in the sales team talking a different language from people in the marketing. People in customer service, customer success, not having, for example, email support templates or support content that is correctly branded. And we did a big project for Ecology, moving them onto HubSpot Service Hub, making sure that the knowledge base looks like the website, looks like their brand, talks the same language. Everybody should be able to deliver the 30-second elevator pitch for the business, right? And that should be consistent across the whole thing. The next problem is, having updated it and done all the work, there's no brand guardian. There's nobody responsible for policing updates and changes and so on. And we see this with companies that have, for example, ISO 9001 quality control things for their service delivery. IT service is quite common. Or they have 27001 security things, so they have really carefully documented procedures and processes for quality control and things like that. But the brand is just sort of completely unmanaged and out of date. And then, 2 or 3 years of living with that chaos and that mess, somebody somewhere goes, oh, we need a new website, or we need to do a brand refresh, and the whole sort of everything has to be updated in one go. Whereas if you've got a brand guardian, you can actually extend the life of a brand and evolve it, and without having to do agonizing rebranding exercises or website rebuilds every so often. Okay. And lastly, the pitfall that we see very often is this smooth pebble. This is sort of it's not quite the same as not targeting your brand. It's about not being distinctive. It's about wanting to look like all the other companies in your sector, which is why a lot of IT tech companies have sort of lots of blue on their website, or why a lot of health tech companies have sort of medical green, medical blue, and pictures of people in white coats. And it's just sort of generic in that sector. And you can just push that out a bit and be distinctive. And one of the exercises we do, for example, when we do a branding project, is we will map competitors' color palettes. And we'll go, look, in your sector, the 8 or 10 direct competitors, they're all sort of in the blue-green space. If you went red and yellow, you'd look different from them. That would be distinctive. And everyone goes, oh, we don't want to do that. We want to look like everyone else. We want to be the safe choice. Well, okay. So this is the smooth pebble. You don't want to be, well, I don't say you want to be offensive, but you want to be differentiated, distinctive, memorable. Okay. So what are the costs of having a cloudy or unclear brand? It's actually quite surprising. It's not just about the difference between this logo and that logo, or this color or that color. The first thing is you get a poor return on your marketing activity because it's not coordinated. It's not coming from the core DNA understanding of what the business is and who it's for. So typically this underpins websites that have high bounce rates, lower conversions. They don't have SEO traction. They don't have AI traction. But there's also the cost of, if you're not clear about what you're doing and who you're for and what it is you're saying, you might do marketing activity that doesn't support progress. You're talking about product services in a way that doesn't resonate correctly with your audience. You do a lot of work, but it just doesn't land, or it doesn't connect, or it doesn't engage. So the opportunity cost is really, really high here. And I see quite a lot of very busy, overworked marketing teams. Quite often they are under-resourced, under-budgeted. In fact, I could do a whole other webinar about how much you should be spending on marketing and why you need a bigger marketing team and why you need an awesome agency. But I would argue that a lot of that busyness and overwork comes from misdirected activity that doesn't generate value because the brand isn't clear. Okay, the next thing is you have to work harder in sales if you are not persuading, connecting consistently with the ideal buyer. It creates doubt and uncertainty. It creates a sense potentially of inauthenticity and untrustworthiness, and a very subconscious, subtle level. So, for example, if you see two different messages about the same thing, or that, it's extraordinary how often this happens. And one of the main reasons why people come to us to rebuild a website is it's out of date. We're talking about products and services that we don't really do anymore, or we've changed how we do them, or we've changed who we do them for. And I'm thinking, how did you get to that? Because what's going to happen if people, I talk about websites a lot because we do a lot of websites as a consequence of our brand work, but if somebody comes into the website and sees this story, this narrative, this service description, and this sort of proposition, and then they engage with sales, and sales have to sort of walk that back or reshape it, it's just uncomfortable. It's not good for credibility. So you have to spend more time working on sales. You have to kind of work harder to clarify. And I think if you've ever been in this experience, the moment you start apologizing for and explaining yourself, you almost create more doubt than you resolve. It's that sort of trying to walk back a problem is often harder than the problem that you started with to try and walk back. So you have to spend more time nurturing people, persuading, convincing. And ultimately, and potentially, if it's not grounded, if your brand and promise is not grounded in the reality, the ground truth of what you do as a business, you will churn more and have more dissatisfaction down the road. So it's critical for sales and customer satisfaction. And then there's all the risks of inefficiency internally because people are pursuing the wrong priorities or doing the wrong thing, or different departments have different visions of what the business is going to be. And there's a subtle implication of this. In large businesses, it can often result in silos and fiefdoms arising where people are sort of not quite singing from the official hymn sheet, but they're potentially trying to do the right thing, but sort of swimming against the tide. In smaller businesses, what tends to happen is you tend to have an owner manager whose opinion counts for quite a lot because they're the boss, and marketing, branding, decision making tends to be driven by that person rather than a considered, rational, kind of coherent pushing forward and differentiating. So you can end up having a brand that's sort of an extension of the owner's ego, but not necessarily well informed and potentially quite variable. So this is a risk that happens. So in some cases, a well architected brand where the owner managers and key stakeholders have gone on a journey together to arrive at it can help kind of how can I put it in a politest possible way, keep the boss under control. Right, give you a chance to actually execute a plan before they change their mind. And I say this with some sympathy because I'm also an owner manager and my opinion counts for quite a lot, and I have opinions about marketing, but I'm right. Okay. And then you get the sort of whiplash effect because 1, 2, 3 years down the road, it's not really working, you're not accelerating, there's not the differentiation, and so you rinse and repeat. You find a different agency, a different website, a different branding, you change it and potentially make the problem worse because you've actually sort of try and put another skim layer of logo and visual identity on top of an unclear brand in the hope that that will change it, or you rebuild the website in the hope that some prettier graphics or some clever animation is going to solve the underlying problem. Now, those things are important. Visual identity is important. Websites are important. But if you get the brand right, you get those things sort of come better as a result of it. Okay. How to avoid a cloudy brand. So this is the sort of last section of the presentation, and I just want to share some tips and ideas about what works to bring a brand into focus. Fundamentally start with your customers. What problems have they got? What options have they got to solve them? What jobs have they got to do? Jobs to be done theory is quite interesting, Clayton Christensen and all that stuff. So understanding, talking to them. This is the most fundamental antidote to we've always done it like this. This is what we've always got. The opinion of the highest paid person in the room, whatever. It's if you've got data and insights from research, from talking to people. A really interesting proxy for doing customer interviews is talking to salespeople. Right, salespeople on the front line, they hear the objections and the needs and the problems, and it's not always the same thing that the product managers or the founder of the business thinks customers have. Okay, so do the work. Okay, so it's one of the reasons why I think people find visual identity logos so neuralgic, difficult, painful. Oh, we did that 3 years ago and I never want to do another branding exercise. We hear that quite commonly. Is because they're not doing the research, the analysis, the rigorous thinking to talk to customers, understand their needs, research competitors, understand what the competitive landscape looks like, and that's a landscape of product, service, fit. It's a landscape of SEO, search intent. It's a landscape of AI. It's a visual landscape. There's quite a lot of work that you need to do to really understand the reality of competitive positioning and branding. Then there's quite a lot of work needed to do creative exploration, and people undervalue this. I think they tend to think of writers as being able to wordsmith things, and designers who are they'll just knock something up. I mean, there's 100 million logos on the planet. You've got to work quite hard to come up with something interesting, distinctive, relevant, and attached to the reality of the business, and that takes creativity and takes a kind of a creativity informed by intimate understanding of the business and the customers that comes out of this research. Same with verbal branding. I'm in the fortunate or unfortunate position of seeing an awful lot of companies brand bibles and tone of voice guidelines, and there's a fairly narrow selection of adjectives that particularly visual branding agencies give to companies for their tone of voice. Very often not enough work has gone into thinking about how does that actually translate into real writing. The other thing that you need to do if you're doing the work of coming up with a new brand and getting it right is explore what the perimeter looks like of what is acceptable. It's very easy to be safe. It's very easy to take feedback and sort of shape and narrow something until it's a nice smooth pebble that's inoffensive and unobjectionable to everybody, in order that the committee of people who are influencing that process are content that no one's going to object to it. Well, that's okay. I really like this phrase, Mayor, most advanced yet acceptable. How could we push the edge a little bit? How could we make it a little bit more interesting, differentiated, and so on? We had a really interesting example of this in a branding exercise that we've done in the last couple of months, where we went through this, workshops and creative thinking, not on the visual identity, but on the positioning, messaging, and verbal identity. And we were working with CEO, with the marketing team, marketing leaders in the business over a series of workshops, and we came back with, at their sort of kind of under the influence of what they wanted and what they asked us to do, with something that was quite safe. It was a kind of pretty accurate reflection of where the business is right now, as opposed to where it's been the last couple of years. And when they got that, they went, yeah, we get that, but it's not ambitious enough. We now need to take it forward a step. And we thought that was a tremendous success. We thought that we'd actually been able to hold up a mirror to the business and sort of move their thinking on a little bit. And it's so much so that, in fact, we want to try and build that. Here's where you are, but really here are a couple of variants of where you could go into our process for everybody. We do brand strategy rather than just a sort of being shaped and guided by what they think is acceptable during the process. Okay. And then you need to implement that brand across all the touch points. So there is an exercise of doing the branding, ideally in conjunction with and sort of hand in hand with, in sequence with the website. And one of the things I think Articulate does really well is visual identity, verbal identity, positioning and messaging, and then translating that into a website design and translating that into marketing copy and website copy, and having that vertically integrated so that the same people are working on it, the same teams are working on it in a way that they're used to working with one another, is efficient, cost effective, and creatively valuable, I think. It depresses me sometimes when we talk to somebody and they go, we've already done our branding and here it is, can you build a website? Because quite often the people who are good at doing or famous for doing branding, mainly logos, not really very clear about how that would affect websites or copywriting. So we still have to do quite a lot of work to interpret that and translate it. And then you need to make sure there is governance in place. It needs to be documented clearly, and that's more than just putting a PDF with the logo brand Bible up on your intranet, right? You need to be giving guidance, training, support. You need documentation. You need assets, collateral, templates. I think it's increasingly important. If you use HubSpot, they've got tools to do this, where you embed that brand, particularly the messaging and the tone of voice, into the AI, into the brand voice, in all the tools that you use for that in Notion and ChatGPT and HubSpot, whatever, that's our set. So that if you use AI at all, it's informed by this. And I think increasingly this AI output makes the work that we do more valuable and more important, because we're programming the AI to do it, to work more consistently. Okay. We have a methodology for doing all this called the Difference Engine, and it lets us explore all of these aspects and knit everything into a kind of cohesive, interesting, differentiated brand. We'd love to talk to you about it. If you have watching this and you'd like to get some help with this, we can get into that. So I'm going to close by saying, if you would like a marketing review, and this is not going to be a big sales pitch, but just an objective, informed first look and findings about your brand and positioning, I would love to do that. You can book it on the website. And amazingly, I'm sometimes overrun, but I'm to the minute. That is the end of the webinar. Thank you very much for joining me. And